Picture a sky that doesn't clear for years, a world where the sun struggles to break through a thick, grey haze, where summers feel like winters, and where the very air we breathe carries the fine, gritty dust of distant catastrophe. This isn't a scene from a science fiction novel. This is something our planet has lived through, not once, but many times. And the force behind these profound global resets wasn't an asteroid or an ice age, but something far more familiar and far more fiery: volcanoes. Not just any volcanoes, but supervolcanoes, colossal forces of nature capable of ejecting enough material to bury continents and alter the course of life on Earth. Today, we're exploring one of history's most compelling mysteries: the time volcanoes rebalanced the planet. What if I told you that these eruptions, events we often see as purely destructive, were also secret architects of renewal? That after the chaos and the darkness came regrowth, rebirth, and even a kind of planetary healing, from the ash-choked atmospheres that followed ancient super-eruptions to the long volcanic winters that reshaped ecosystems and human history. We're going to unravel how Earth's most violent phenomena didn't just bring endings, they made new beginnings possible. This is a story written in ice cores and tree rings, in layers of rock and legends passed down through generations. It's a narrative that connects geology and climate, life and resilience, destruction and creation, in ways that might forever change how you see the world beneath your feet. So come with me on this journey deep into Earth's fiery heart and far back through time. By the end, you won't look at a volcano the same way again. You'll see it not as an ending, but as a turning point. A reset, a force of balance in a world of constant change. To grasp the sheer scale of a supervolcano, let's start by comparing it to something we're more familiar with. Think of a standard volcanic eruption like Mount St. Helens in 1980. That event was devastating, ejecting about 0.2 cubic miles of material. Now imagine an eruption over 1,000 times more powerful. That's the realm of a supervolcano. These aren't just large mountains, they're often vast, depressed areas called calderas, formed when the ground collapses after a truly catastrophic eruption. Yellowstone in the United States is a perfect example, a massive simmering cauldron of molten rock, not a single peak. The true difference lies beneath the surface, in the magma chamber. For a volcano to be classified as a supervolcano, its chamber must be enormous, holding hundreds of cubic miles of molten rock, gas, and crystals. When the pressure in this chamber finally exceeds the strength of the rock containing it, the result isn't a simple lava flow. It's a cataclysmic explosion that can literally tear the crust apart. The eruption column doesn't just rise into the sky, it punches directly into the stratosphere, reaching heights of over 30 miles. This is crucial because material injected this high bypasses the weather systems of the lower atmosphere, allowing it to spread across the entire globe. The composition of that eruptive plume is what makes it a global climate reset button. It's not just about the incredible volume of ash, which alone could bury entire regions. The real climate drivers are the gases, particularly sulfur dioxide. In the stratosphere, this gas undergoes a chemical transformation, combining with water vapor to form tiny droplets of sulfuric acid. These droplets create a vast, shimmering aerosol shield that acts like a layer of tiny mirrors, reflecting a significant portion of the sun's incoming energy back into space. Meanwhile, the microscopic ash particles also contribute to this global dimming effect. Together, they drastically reduce the amount of solar radiation that reaches Earth's surface, initiating a rapid and profound cooling period that can last for years. fundamentally altering the planet's energy balance and weather patterns. The sheer force of a supervolcanic explosion is almost beyond human comprehension. It begins with a roar that shakes the planet's very foundations, launching a column of superheated gas, rock, and ash so high it punches through the troposphere and into the calm, stable stratosphere. This is the critical moment that transforms a regional disaster into a global event. Up there, high above the weather, there are no rain clouds to wash the particles away. Instead, the eruptive plume is caught by the jet stream, a fast-moving river of air that acts like a celestial conveyor belt, distributing the volcanic material evenly across the entire globe within a matter of weeks. For those on the ground, the first sign of this global catastrophe is the dimming of the sun. It doesn't set like it normally would. Instead, the sky takes on a hazy, coppery hue, and daylight becomes a perpetual, eerie twilight. Fine, abrasive ash begins to fall like gray snow, silently coating everything: forests, cities, lakes, and farmlands. It infiltrates machinery, clogs waterways, and makes the very air dangerous to breathe, causing respiratory illnesses in humans and animals alike. But the ashfall is just the beginning of the ordeal. The real threat comes from what we cannot see, the invisible gas known as sulfur dioxide. In the stratosphere, this gas undergoes a profound chemical change, bonding with water vapor to create countless billions of tiny sulfuric acid droplets. These droplets form a vast, shimmering aerosol shield that envelops the entire planet. This aerosol layer is remarkably effective at its job. It acts like a giant sunshade, reflecting a significant portion of the sun's life, giving energy back into the cold void of space. The result is a rapid and dramatic drop in global temperatures. We're not talking about a slight chill. This is a deep freeze. Average temperatures can plummet by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, a change that might sound small on a weather forecast but is catastrophic for the global climate system. This period, known as a volcanic winter, can persist for years, even up to a decade. Growing seasons vanish, crops fail repeatedly, leading to widespread famine. Ecosystems collapse as plants die off and the herbivores that depend on them starve, followed by the carnivores. It creates a genetic bottleneck, a point in history where the population of a species is reduced to a perilously small number, as some scientists believe happened to early humans after the Toba eruption 74,000 years ago. To make a dire situation even worse, the sulfur aerosols also lead to another grim consequence: acid rain. The sulfuric acid in the atmosphere eventually condenses and falls back to Earth in precipitation. This rain is far more acidic than normal, damaging remaining vegetation, acidifying lakes and rivers to the point where fish cannot survive, and leaching essential nutrients from the soil. The world becomes a cold, dark, and hostile place, a planet gripped in a deep freeze of its own making. It is a true apocalyptic scenario, a brutal reset that tests the limits of resilience for every living thing. Yet, it is within this utter devastation that the seeds for a profound planetary renewal are quietly and paradoxically being sown. Yet in the wake of this chilling darkness, a remarkable and counterintuitive transformation begins. That same layer of suffocating ash, which initially smothers the land and blocks the sun, holds within it the very ingredients for life's grand return. Volcanic ash is far more than just pulverized rock. It is a complex mineral cocktail, packed with essential nutrients like potassium, phosphorus, calcium, and a host of trace elements that are the building blocks of healthy soil. These are the same nutrients found in commercial fertilizers, but here they are delivered on a continental scale, a gift from the Earth itself after its period of violent upheaval. The process is slow but incredibly effective. Over months and years, rainfall and weathering begin to break down the sharp, glassy particles of ash. This chemical decomposition releases those locked-away minerals into the ground, fundamentally altering the soil's composition. What was once barren, nutrient-poor Earth is gradually transformed into some of the most fertile land on the planet. The evidence for this is etched into human history itself. Consider the slopes of Mount Vesuvius in Italy. After its infamous eruption in 79 AD that buried Pompeii and Herculaneum, the region was a sterile wasteland. Yet within a few centuries, those same ash-enriched soils became renowned for their incredible productivity, yielding bountiful harvests of grapes, olives, and tomatoes that are still prized today. This pattern repeats across the globe, from the coffee plantations growing in the rich soils near Central American volcanoes to the lush vineyards of Washington state, which benefit from ash deposits from Mount St. Helens and ancient Cascade eruptions. This renewal isn't confined to the immediate vicinity of the blast. Wind and water act as nature's distribution system, carrying these fine, nutrient-rich particles across vast distances. Ash plumes can circle the globe, and while most of the larger particles fall out near the source, the finest aerosols can travel for thousands of miles before settling. This means that a supervolcano eruption in one hemisphere can subtly enhance soil fertility in another, creating a faint, global wave of enrichment following the initial wave of destruction. It's a planetary scale example of how destruction and creation are inextricably linked in nature's cycles. The volcano, an agent of utter devastation, becomes an inadvertent gardener, tilling and fertilizing the soil for the next chapter of life. This ash doesn't just feed plants on land, it also plays a crucial role in the oceans. When immense quantities of ash settle on the ocean's surface, they act as a powerful fertilizer for marine ecosystems as well. The iron and other minerals within the ash provide a vital nutrient boost for phytoplankton, the microscopic algae that form the base of the marine food web. This can trigger massive algal blooms that draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and support entire food chains, from tiny zooplankton up to large fish and whales. So while the atmosphere is cooling and dimming under a veil of aerosols, the oceans are experiencing their own kind of volcanic-induced bloom, showcasing yet another dimension of this complex global reset. But the story doesn't end with a darkened sky and a cooler planet. The real planetary reset is orchestrated by something far more subtle and powerful. High in the stratosphere, the sulfur dioxide gas from the eruption undergoes a remarkable transformation. It begins to interact with water vapor, and through a series of chemical reactions, it forms countless trillions of microscopic droplets of sulfuric acid. These droplets, known as sulfate aerosols, are the true architects of the global climate reset. They don't just float there passively, they create a vast, shimmering shield around the entire Earth. This shield is incredibly effective at its job, acting like a layer of tiny, reflective mirrors that scatter incoming sunlight and bounce a significant portion of it directly back into the cold void of space. This phenomenon is what scientists call global dimming, and its effects are profound and immediate. The amount of solar energy reaching the planet's surface can drop by a staggering 10% or more. This isn't a gentle cooling, it's a rapid and dramatic planetary chill. The most famous historical example of this is the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia in 1815. The following year, 1816, became known across Europe and North America as the year without a summer. In May and June, frosts and snowfalls killed newly planted crops. In July and August, ice was reported on lakes and rivers as far south as Pennsylvania. The resulting crop failures led to catastrophic food shortages, famines, and waves of social unrest, demonstrating just how vulnerable human civilization is to these natural climate resets. Today, scientists study these past events with intense interest, not just for historical understanding but for what they can teach us about a controversial modern idea: solar radiation management, or geoengineering. The volcanic process is a perfect, natural example of the very type of intervention some researchers have proposed to counteract human-caused global warming. The theory is that by deliberately injecting similar reflective particles into the stratosphere, we might be able to mimic this cooling effect. However, the lessons from volcanoes also serve as a massive warning. This global dimming is anything but a simple, uniform fix. The sulfate aerosols don't just cool the planet, they drastically disrupt established weather patterns. By altering the temperature gradient between the equator and the poles, these aerosols can change the very path of the jet stream, leading to unprecedented and unpredictable weather extremes. Some regions might experience prolonged, severe droughts as rain belts shift, while others could be inundated with constant, flooding rains. The aerosols also act as nuclei around which clouds can form, but these clouds often behave differently, becoming more reflective but sometimes less efficient at producing precipitation. This complex web of side effects shows that while a volcanic eruption provides a natural counterbalance to warming, it does so at a tremendous cost, showcasing Earth's powerful but often brutal self-regulating mechanisms. While the atmosphere bears the initial brunt of a volcanic eruption, the true reach of its impact extends far deeper into the vast and powerful engine of our planet's climate, the world's oceans. These immense bodies of water, with their complex network of currents, act as a global conveyor belt, distributing heat from the equator toward the poles and maintaining the delicate thermal balance that makes Earth habitable. A major volcanic event sends a shockwave through this entire system. The massive injection of ash and sulfate aerosols into the stratosphere doesn't just cool the air, it fundamentally alters global wind patterns. These winds are the primary drivers of surface ocean currents, like the mighty Gulf Stream that carries warm tropical waters northward to temper Europe's climate. When these wind patterns shift or weaken due to the atmospheric changes following an eruption, the currents they push can slow down or even be rerouted. The consequences of this are profound and geographically specific. A significant slowdown of the Gulf Stream, for instance, would not be met with a uniform global cool down. Instead, it could lead to a bizarre paradox. While the planet as a whole is cooler, regions like Western Europe might experience a period of unexpectedly harsh and prolonged cooling, as the vital delivery of warmth from the tropics is curtailed. Meanwhile, other parts of the world could see pockets of unusual warming, as heat that would normally be transported away instead becomes trapped. This redistribution of thermal energy can lead to extreme and unpredictable weather events across the globe, from devastating droughts in one continent to unseasonable flooding in another. Simultaneously, the volcanic material begins a slow descent from the sky, eventually settling onto the ocean's surface. This fallout of fine ash plays a second, more subtle role in the oceanic reset. This ash is not merely inert dust, it is a rich slurry of minerals and trace elements, most notably iron. In many parts of the open ocean, particularly in regions known as high-nutrient, low-chlorophyll zones, the growth of microscopic marine plants called phytoplankton is limited by a lack of available iron. A volcanic eruption provides a colossal, natural fertilization event. The influx of iron triggers massive phytoplankton blooms that can be so vast they are visible from space, transforming clear blue waters into swirling green expanses. These blooms set off a complex chain reaction within the marine ecosystem. The phytoplankton form the base of the food web, potentially boosting fisheries in the years following an eruption. But they also engage in a critical biogeochemical process. Through photosynthesis, these tiny organisms absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. When they die, a portion of this carbon sinks to the deep ocean floor, effectively sequestering it away from the atmosphere for centuries or even millennia. This process represents a natural form of carbon capture, temporarily altering atmospheric CO2 levels and adding another layer to the planet's self-regulation. However, this too is a double-edged sword. While it draws down CO2, the subsequent decomposition of this organic material at depth can consume oxygen, potentially creating or expanding low-oxygen, dead zones in the ocean. This intricate interplay between the volcanic atmosphere and the deep ocean underscores a fundamental truth of Earth's climate system. No single event occurs in isolation. A change in one sphere creates a cascade of effects through all others, a complex and interconnected dance that ensures every major eruption contributes to a comprehensive planetary-wide adjustment. The fingerprints of volcanoes are etched not just in rock and ice, but in the very pages of human history, often appearing at the most pivotal turning points of civilization. These events did not merely happen alongside human stories, they actively rewrote them, forcing societies into a crucible of adaptation, migration, or collapse. One of the most dramatic examples comes from the Mediterranean around the year 1600 BCE. The island of Thera, now known as Santorini, was home to a vibrant Minoan settlement. Then, the volcano at its heart exploded with a force thought to be many times greater than the famous Krakatoa eruption. The immediate effects would have been apocalyptic for the surrounding islands, towering tsunamis crashing into the northern coast of Crete, the sky blackened by ash, and settlements buried under meters of volcanic rock. While the Minoan civilization on Crete did not vanish overnight, the eruption of Thera delivered a blow from which it could never fully recover. The massive ashfall would have crippled agriculture for years, leading to famine. The tsunamis likely destroyed the Minoans' powerful naval fleet, the very source of their trading wealth and military strength. This sudden vulnerability left them exposed to conquest, and within a few generations, the Mycenaeans from the Greek mainland had taken control of their palaces. The eruption effectively broke the back of Europe's first advanced civilization, clearing the way for the rise of classical Greece and altering the cultural trajectory of the entire Western world. Centuries later, another mysterious climate catastrophe struck, this one documented in written records from across the globe. In the year 536, something went terribly wrong. Byzantine historian Procopius wrote of a sun that gave its light without brightness, like the sun in eclipse, and this darkness lasted for an entire year. Similar accounts from Europe to China describe a thick, persistent fog that blotted out the sun, bringing summer snowfalls, failed harvests, and widespread famine. Tree rings from that period show some of the most stunted growth in the last 2,000 years, evidence of a deep and prolonged cold snap. The cause is now widely believed to be a massive volcanic eruption, possibly in the tropics or Iceland. The consequences of this volcanic winter were profound and horrifyingly logical. With famine weakening populations across Europe and Asia, a terrifying new disease found perfect conditions to spread. In 541, the bubonic plague arrived in the Byzantine Empire at the port of Pelusium. This was the beginning of the Justinian plague, a pandemic that would go on to kill tens of millions of people, perhaps as much as half the population of Constantinople. It shattered the economy and military strength of the Byzantine Empire, dashing Emperor Justinian's dream of reuniting the Roman Empire and fundamentally reshaping the political landscape of Europe for centuries to come. A volcano thousands of miles away had set in motion a chain of events that brought an empire to its knees. A more recent example shows how these volcanic pressures could directly contribute to social revolution. In June of 1783, a fissure of over 130 vents, known as Laki, tore open in Iceland. For 8 months, it spewed colossal amounts of lava and toxic gases, but its most devastating impact was a vast haze of sulfur dioxide that drifted across Europe. The summer of 1783 became known as the Sand Summer in parts of Europe, as the fog was so thick it left a coating of dust and caused widespread respiratory illness. The gases led to extreme weather, including devastating hailstorms that killed livestock and acid rain that damaged crops. The result was a catastrophic famine, particularly in France. The following winter was one of the most severe on record, and harvests failed for several years running. This led to widespread hunger among the peasantry and the urban poor, skyrocketing food prices, and immense social unrest. While the French Revolution of 1789 had deep-rooted political and economic causes, the environmental catastrophe triggered by Laki was the kindling that made the tinderbox explode. The famine exacerbated existing inequalities and pushed a desperate population to the brink, demonstrating how a geological event in a remote corner of the world can help topple a monarchy and change the course of modern history. These events remind us that human history is not a separate story from natural history. They are deeply and irrevocably intertwined, with volcanoes serving as powerful, unpredictable editors of the human script. So how do we move from these gripping historical accounts to solid scientific evidence? How can we be so sure that a volcano on the other side of the world was responsible for a famine or a plague centuries ago? The proof isn't found in dusty old books alone. It's locked away in some of the most pristine and remote places on Earth, the massive ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica. Imagine scientists on these vast, frozen deserts, drilling deep into the ice with specialized equipment. They're not looking for water, they're extracting cylindrical samples called ice cores, which are essentially time capsules preserving Earth's atmospheric history in exquisite, frozen detail. The principle is beautifully simple. Every year, snowfall in these polar regions adds a new layer of ice. This snow carries with it a sample of the atmosphere at that moment, trapping tiny bubbles of air and any particles that were floating around like volcanic ash or sulfate aerosols. As more snow falls, these layers are buried and compressed, creating a continuous chronological record that can stretch back hundreds of thousands of years. By carefully extracting and analyzing these cores, scientists can read this frozen history like the rings of a tree. When a massive volcanic eruption occurs, it leaves an unmistakable signature, a sharp, well-defined layer of sulfate and fine ash embedded in the ice. The thickness and chemical composition of this layer tell a powerful story about the eruption's size, its location, and how much gas it injected into the stratosphere. But the ice cores offer even more. Within the frozen water, molecules themselves is a record of past temperatures. This is done by measuring the ratio of different types or isotopes of oxygen atoms. Simply put, water molecules containing a heavier oxygen isotope tend to condense and fall as precipitation more readily than lighter ones. During colder periods, this process is enhanced, meaning a higher proportion of the heavier isotope is removed from the atmosphere before the clouds reach the polar regions. Therefore, the ice layers that form during a volcanic winter show a distinct shift in this oxygen isotope ratio, providing direct physical proof of a sudden temperature drop. By matching a sulfate spike from a specific year to a corresponding temperature plunge in the very same ice layer, researchers can draw a direct line from cause to effect with incredible precision. This is how we know, for example, that the mysterious event of 536 was almost certainly volcanic, and that the Toba eruption 74,000 years ago coincided with a period of severe global cooling. These frozen archives are complemented by another natural recorder of history, trees. Dendrochronologists, scientists who study tree rings, provide a parallel timeline. Each year, a tree adds a new ring of growth. In a good year with ample sun and rain, that ring is wide. In a bad year, like during a volcanic winter with cold temperatures and reduced sunlight, the ring is shockingly narrow. By studying ancient wood from preserved logs and even archaeological sites, scientists can create master chronologies of tree growth that stretch back millennia. When they find a period where trees across vast geographical areas all show severely stunted growth for several years in a row, it's a huge red flag pointing to a major climate disruption. Often, these tree ring anomalies align perfectly with the sulfate peaks found in ice cores, creating a powerful, multi-proxy confirmation of a past volcanic reset. Together, these natural archives, the ice cores and the tree rings, transform into the most accurate history books we have on Earth's climate past. They allow us to move beyond speculation and piece together the story of these planetary resets with a level of detail that is truly remarkable. This painstaking detective work is not just about understanding the past. It's absolutely crucial for assessing the risks we might face in the future. By building a complete record of how often these cataclysmic eruptions occur and just how severe their impacts have been, we can better prepare for the possibility of the next one. This historical baseline is invaluable, and it sets the stage for an even more profound idea: that these violent events might have played an essential role in keeping our planet habitable over the immense span of geological time. This concept of Earth possessing a natural thermostat is one of the most fascinating ideas in modern geology and climatology. Think of our planet not as a static rock, but as a living, breathing system that is constantly working to regulate its own temperature. Volcanoes in this grand scheme are not just random acts of violence. They are critical pressure valves, essential components in a complex planetary cooling system. The theory posits that over millions of years, periods of intense volcanic activity have provided a crucial counterbalance to the slow, natural warming trends caused by factors like changes in Earth's orbit or the steady brightening of our sun. This isn't about a single, catastrophic eruption saving the day. It's about the cumulative background effect of countless volcanic events, both large and small, that constantly release sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere. This creates a persistent, faint aerosol veil that subtly shades the planet. During eras when tectonic forces are particularly restless, such as when continental plates collide, triggering widespread volcanism, this veil can thicken significantly. The collective cooling from these eruptions can effectively put the brakes on a warming climate, preventing it from tipping into a runaway greenhouse state like the scorching nightmare of Venus. In this way, volcanoes have likely played a starring role in maintaining the long-term stability that has allowed life to not just arise, but to thrive and evolve for billions of years. A powerful, albeit complex, example of this dual role can be found in a period of profound global warming known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PETM, which occurred around 56 million years ago. For reasons still debated, massive amounts of carbon dioxide and methane were released into the atmosphere over a few thousand years, causing global temperatures to soar by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. This event caused ocean acidification and significant shifts in ecosystems worldwide. The initial trigger for this carbon release is a subject of intense study, and one of the leading suspects is, you guessed it, volcanism. Immense volcanic activity associated with the opening of the North Atlantic Ocean may have heated organic rich sediments on the seafloor, cooking off their stored greenhouse gases. But here's where the thermostat concept comes into play. While this volcanic activity may have helped start the fire, it also likely helped put it out. The same millions of years of eruptions that potentially initiated the warming would have also pumped enormous quantities of sulfur dioxide and ash into the sky. As the petum progressed, the cumulative cooling effect from this relentless volcanic output is thought to have gradually counteracted the intense greenhouse warming. The planet's climate system, aided by these volcanic aerosols, eventually found a new equilibrium and began a slow return to a cooler state. This illustrates the incredible duality of volcanoes. They can be the arsonist and the fire department, capable of both plunging us into a deep freeze and, through their carbon dioxide emissions over geological time, helping to pull us out of one. This delicate push and pull relationship is fundamental to understanding why Earth has remained a livable world for so long, constantly self-correcting through its most violent processes. 74,000 years ago, on what is now the island of Sumatra in Indonesia, the Earth unleashed a fury so profound it defies modern comparison. The Toba supervolcano did not simply erupt. It effectively tore itself apart in a cataclysm that represents one of the most colossal single events in the last 2 million years. To grasp the sheer scale, consider this. It ejected over 670 cubic miles of rock, ash, and gas into the atmosphere. To put that almost unimaginable volume into perspective, that's enough material to bury the entire state of California under a layer of ash nearly 40 feet thick. This wasn't just an eruption. It was a planetary-scale event that would set in motion a chain of consequences stretching across the globe and echoing through millennia. The immediate aftermath would have been a scene of pure horror for any life nearby, but the real story of Toba's power unfolded high above the ground. The eruption column shot an estimated 25 miles into the sky, piercing directly into the stratosphere and ensuring its payload would spread across the entire planet. The key ingredient in this global recipe for a reset was sulfur dioxide. In the upper atmosphere, this gas transformed into a dense, lingering blanket of sulfate aerosols. These microscopic particles acted like trillions of tiny mirrors, reflecting a significant portion of the sun's incoming energy back into space. The result was a rapid and severe volcanic winter. Climate models and evidence from ice cores and lake sediments suggest global average temperatures plummeted by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius for years, and perhaps even for a full decade. This was not a gentle cooling. It was a deep, prolonged freeze that would have shattered ecosystems worldwide. This period of intense cold and reduced sunlight had a devastating impact on the planet's life support systems. Photosynthesis would have ground to a near halt for several growing seasons. Forests died back, grasslands withered, and the primary food sources for countless herbivores vanished. This collapse of the food web would have triggered a wave of extinctions and population crashes among animal species across the globe, and our own ancestors, early Homo sapiens, were caught directly in the path of this catastrophe. At the time of the eruption, small bands of modern humans had already begun their migration out of Africa into parts of Asia. They were a fragile, scattered species, numbering perhaps in the tens of thousands. The environmental chaos wrought by Toba would have pushed these groups to the absolute brink of extinction. This is where one of the most compelling and debated ideas in anthropology comes into play, the Toba catastrophe theory. The theory proposes that the volcanic winter and its aftermath created a genetic bottleneck in the human population. The idea is that the global human population crashed so severely that only a very small number of breeding pairs, some estimates suggest as few as 1,000 to 10,000 individuals, managed to survive this period of extreme hardship. Evidence for this comes from studies of human genetic diversity, which suggest that all humans alive today are descended from a relatively small population that existed around this exact time. The theory paints a dramatic picture. Our species was nearly wiped out, and the entire future of humanity hung by the thinnest of threads, all because of a single geological event. However, science is a process of constant questioning, and more recent archaeological and genetic research has begun to challenge the severity of this bottleneck. Excavations at sites in Africa and India, for instance, show evidence of continuous human occupation before, during, and after the Toba eruption. This suggests that while the event was undoubtedly horrific, it may not have been the near-extinction event once proposed. Instead of a single, dramatic bottleneck, some scientists now argue for a less severe but longer period of population decline and fragmentation. The world after Toba likely became a patchwork of refuges, pockets of land where the climate was less severe, food and water were still available, and small groups of hardy humans could hunker down and survive. In these isolated pockets, our ancestors would have had to adapt with incredible ingenuity, developing new social strategies and technologies to endure the long, cold years. Whether the impact was a catastrophic bottleneck or a severe population squeeze, the Toba case study remains a paramount example of the deep, undeniable interconnectedness of geology and biology. It demonstrates in the starkest terms how a single event originating from the Earth's molten interior can ripple through the atmosphere, climate, and ecosystems to directly shape the course of evolution. The story of Toba forces us to confront our own fragility in the face of nature's immense power, while also highlighting the incredible resilience that allowed a handful of our ancestors to persevere through what might have been the darkest winter our species has ever faced. Their survival ensured the future of humanity, making the Toba supereruption not just a story of destruction, but a pivotal chapter in our own evolutionary journey. While Toba's story is written in the deep ice of millennia, a much more recent and meticulously documented eruption offers a stunningly clear window into how a single volcano can rewrite a year of human history. Just 2 centuries ago, in April 1815, Mount Tambora on the island of Sumbawa in Indonesia unleashed a cataclysm that would be felt in villages and cities across the globe. The eruption itself was a spectacle of pure terror for those nearby. The mountain literally blew its top off, reducing its height by over 4,000 feet and killing an estimated 70,000 people in the immediate region from pyroclastic flows, tsunamis, and falling ash. But Tambora's true legacy was not its local devastation. It was the invisible cloud of gas it sent racing around the world. The eruption column soared an estimated 28 miles into the atmosphere, punching well into the stratosphere. In doing so, it injected an almost unimaginable volume of sulfur dioxide, an estimated 100 million tons of it. High above the weather, this gas underwent a rapid chemical transformation, condensing into a fine, persistent haze of sulfate aerosols. This veil began its silent journey across the planet, carried by the high-altitude winds. Within months, this microscopic shield was in place, reflecting enough sunlight back into space to measurably dial down the planet's thermostat. The global average temperature dropped by 0.4 to 0.7 degrees Celsius. While that number might sound modest, its effects were anything but. This was a global energy deficit, a slight but consistent cooling that disrupted the delicate balance of the seasons upon which all agriculture, and therefore all civilization, depended. The following year, 1816, became infamous across the Northern Hemisphere as the year without a summer. In New England and across much of Europe, the weather seemed to have lost its mind. Frosts killed tender crops in May. In June, a series of massive snowstorms blanketed the northeastern United States and Canada, with reports of snowdrift still feet deep in Quebec come early July. August brought not warmth but more killer frosts. The result was agricultural collapse on a continental scale. Grain prices skyrocketed. Oats, crucial for feeding the horses that were the primary mode of transportation, became so scarce and expensive that it reportedly helped inspire a German inventor named Karl Dries to dream up a new, horseless means of transport, an early precursor to the bicycle. The social and economic upheaval was immediate and severe. In Switzerland, the failure of the harvest led to widespread famine. Desperate, hungry crowds rioted for bread, and typhus spread like wildfire through the weakened population. In Ireland, a severe cold and rain led to a potato crop failure, foreshadowing the much greater famine that would strike a few decades later. This crisis triggered a wave of mass migration, with thousands of families from New England and Europe deciding to abandon their frozen farms and seek opportunity in the newly opened territories of the American Midwest, inadvertently accelerating the westward expansion of the United States. Yet from this gloomy, seemingly cursed summer, an unexpected spark of creativity also emerged. That year, a group of literary figures, including the 18-year-old Mary Shelley, her future husband Percy Bysshe Shelley, and the celebrated Lord Byron, were vacationing at a villa on Lake Geneva. Trapped indoors for days on end by the incessant cold rain and gloom, they decided to pass the time by challenging each other to write the best ghost story. The oppressive, eerie atmosphere of that endless winter seeped into Mary Shelley's imagination, inspiring her to craft a tale of a scientist who dared to create life itself. The novel she began that summer, Frankenstein, is now seen not only as a foundational work of science fiction, but also as a profound meditation on ambition, responsibility, and the unintended consequences of tampering with nature, themes that resonate powerfully with the very volcanic event that made its creation possible. The story of Tambora is a powerful testament to the interconnectedness of our world. It proves that a volcano doesn't need to be a supervolcano to have super global effects. In an era before global supply chains could buffer such a disaster, the vulnerability of an agrarian society to a sudden climate shift was laid bare. It serves as a stark, relatively recent reminder that our daily lives and economies are deeply, and sometimes precariously, tied to the immense and unpredictable forces of the planet we call home. Thankfully, we are no longer in the dark, waiting helplessly for the next supervolcanic event. The science of volcanology has entered a new era of high-tech surveillance, where a global network of scientists keeps a constant, watchful eye on Earth's most restless giants. Places like the Yellowstone caldera in the United States, the Campi Flegrei caldera near Naples, Italy, and the Taupo volcanic zone in New Zealand are now among the most intensely monitored spots on the planet. This isn't about predicting an eruption with pinpoint accuracy. That remains beyond our current capabilities, but about understanding the vital signs of these sleeping beasts to provide the earliest possible warning. The toolkit for this planetary watch is incredibly sophisticated. High above us, a fleet of satellites equipped with radar constantly scans the Earth's surface. Using a technique called INSAR, which stands for Interferometric Synthetic Aperture Radar, these satellites can detect minuscule changes in the ground's shape, measuring uplift or subsidence of the land to within a fraction of an inch. It's like taking the planet's pulse from space. At Yellowstone, this technology has revealed the caldera's remarkable breathing pattern. The The vast plateau rhythmically rises and falls by several inches over years and decades as magma and superheated fluids shift in the enormous chamber miles below. This isn't necessarily a sign of an imminent eruption, but it is a crucial clue in understanding the system's restlessness and plumbing. On the ground, an array of sensitive seismometers acts like a stethoscope pressed against the Earth's crust, listening for the faintest rumbles and tremors. Every time magma forces its way through fractures in the rock, it generates a unique seismic signature. By analyzing the patterns and locations of thousands of these small earthquakes, scientists can map the movement of molten rock in the underworld, building a three-dimensional picture of the magma body's size, depth, and potential pathways to the surface. Complementing this are networks of gas sensors that sniff the air for changes in the chemical cocktail seeping from the ground. A sudden increase in the release of certain gases, like carbon dioxide or sulfur dioxide, can be a telltale sign that fresh magma is degassing at shallow depths, potentially pressurizing the system. So, what is all this data telling us about the risk? For the most part, it's reassuring. The probability of a catastrophic supereruption occurring within our lifetimes at any given location is statistically very low, perhaps around 1% per century. These are not ticking time bombs, but vast, complex geological systems that operate on timescales of hundreds of thousands of years. The monitoring is not driven by a belief that doom is imminent, but by the fundamental scientific need to understand these powerful forces and the prudent responsibility to be prepared. And that preparation is where this high-tech vigilance truly pays off. While we cannot stop an eruption, an early warning of months or even years could be invaluable. It would provide governments and international agencies with a critical window to develop contingency plans. We could strategize how to safeguard global food supplies by creating emergency grain reserves, develop plans for alternative energy sources to counter the potential dimming of the sun, and even model the precise climate impacts to better protect vulnerable populations. This forward thinking transforms a potential catastrophe of biblical proportions into a manageable, though still immensely challenging, global planning exercise. Furthermore, by closely watching these systems, we gain priceless insights into the smaller, more frequent eruptions that also contribute to Earth's ongoing climate regulation, helping us refine our models of the planet's intricate and dynamic balancing act. This constant vigil is more than just disaster preparedness. It is a profound expression of our desire to understand the powerful planet we call home. The concept of deliberately engineering our planet's climate is no longer just the stuff of science fiction. In fact, some of the most serious proposals on the table today take their inspiration directly from the very volcanic events we've been exploring. This field is known as geoengineering, and one of its most discussed methods is called stratospheric aerosol injection, or SRI. The idea is strikingly simple in theory. If a large volcano can temporarily cool the planet by releasing reflective particles into the stratosphere, could we not carefully mimic that process to counteract the warming effects of our own greenhouse gas emissions? Proponents envision a fleet of specialized aircraft making regular flights to disperse tiny, engineered particles like sulfates or perhaps even diamond dust to create a thin, protective sunshade for the Earth. This is not a proposal to be taken lightly, and it is surrounded by a whirlwind of intense controversy and profound ethical questions. The risks are immense and terrifyingly unpredictable. While past eruptions show us that global cooling is possible, they also serve as stark warnings of the potential side effects. We know that the volcanic veil doesn't just cool the planet uniformly, it dramatically disrupts global rainfall patterns. A man-made sunshade could potentially trigger severe, prolonged droughts in some of the world's most vulnerable agricultural regions, like the Sahel in Africa or parts of Southeast Asia, jeopardizing food and water security for millions. Furthermore, these sulfate aerosols could accelerate the chemical reactions that break down the ozone layer, undoing decades of progress made by the Montreal Protocol and allowing harmful ultraviolet radiation to reach the surface. The ethical dilemmas are perhaps even more complex. Who gets to decide to deploy such a planet-altering technology? Who would be held responsible if something went catastrophically wrong? There's a very real concern that the mere discussion of a potential technological fix could create a moral hazard, undermining the global political will to do the essential work of actually reducing carbon emissions at their source. The lessons from volcanoes are our most valuable natural experiments, providing a crucial reality check for these grand proposals. They show us that while a global cooling effect is achievable, it comes with a package of chaotic and often damaging consequences that we are only beginning to understand. This ongoing debate forces us to confront a fundamental question about our relationship with the planet. Are we wise enough to intentionally take the reins of Earth's climate system? Or are we merely studying nature's awesome power to better appreciate the delicate balance we must not disrupt? It's a profound paradox of nature that from the ashes of total destruction often springs forth an explosion of new life, more diverse and resilient than what came before. While a supervolcanic eruption initially scorches the landscape into a sterile wasteland, that very act of obliteration clears the slate, wiping out established ecosystems and in doing so, creates a blank canvas for evolution to begin its work anew. This process is known as ecological succession, and it's one of the most powerful ways volcanoes act as unexpected catalysts for biodiversity. The first to arrive on the barren, rock-strewn terrain are the pioneers' hardy species like lichens, mosses, and certain types of cyanobacteria. These organisms are the ultimate survivors. They don't need rich soil because they can slowly break down the volcanic rock itself, extracting minerals and, over time, creating the first thin layer of organic material. Their death and decay, combined with the ongoing weathering of the ash, gradually builds a rudimentary soil capable of supporting more complex life. This sets in motion a predictable yet fascinating chain of events. Grasses and small flowering plants follow the pioneers, their roots further stabilizing the new soil. These plants then provide food and shelter for the first animal colonists, often insects and wind-blown spiders. As these early residents live and die, they contribute more organic matter to the ground, enriching it further and allowing shrubs and small trees to take root. Over decades and centuries, this slow, steady parade of life transforms a monochromatic landscape of gray ash into a complex, multi-layered tapestry of forest or grassland, buzzing with insects, birds, and mammals. Each stage in this succession creates new ecological niches, specific roles and habitats for species to fill, which in turn allows for greater and greater biodiversity to develop. The end result is often an ecosystem that is not just restored, but is uniquely adapted to its volcanic origins, sometimes hosting species found nowhere else on Earth. Perhaps the most famous and well-documented natural laboratory for this process is the island of Krakatoa, located in the Sunda Strait between Java and Sumatra. In August of 1883, a series of cataclysmic explosions literally tore the island apart. The eruption was heard over 3,000 miles away, and the resulting tsunamis killed tens of thousands of people. Most importantly for ecologists, the main island was almost entirely sterilized, blanketed in a layer of searing hot pumice and ash up to 200 feet thick. Every single living thing, from the tallest tree to the smallest microbe in the soil, was utterly vaporized. For scientists, this presented a rare and terrible opportunity. to study how life returns to a truly blank slate. The recolonization of Krakatoa became one of the most important studies in ecological history. Within just 3 years, a mere handful of scientists visiting the island were stunned to find a few tiny spiderlings and a single flowering plant struggling to survive in the otherwise barren landscape. They were likely carried across the 40 kilometers of ocean from Java by winds or ocean currents. By the 1920s, a young tropical forest was already establishing itself, and today, the island is once again covered in dense rainforest, teeming with life including deer, reptiles, and even large predators like pythons and monitor lizards. What makes Krakatoa so special is that every plant and animal species on the island today is the descendant of a colonist that arrived after 1883. It is a living, breathing testament to nature's incredible resilience and its powerful drive to reclaim even the most devastated places, often with a whole new cast of characters. On a much grander geological scale, this same process of destruction and renewal has been a major driver of evolutionary innovation throughout Earth's deep history. Volcanic activity is a key suspect in several mass extinction events, the most severe being the end Permian extinction around 252 million years ago. This event, often called the Great Dying, was likely triggered by colossal, prolonged eruptions from the Siberian Traps, a vast region of flood basalts that poured unimaginable quantities of lava, gas, and ash into the environment for nearly 1 million years. It was the closest life has ever come to being completely wiped out, with an estimated 96% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species vanishing forever. Yet, from this near-total ecological collapse, a new world was born. The emptied ecosystems meant that the few surviving species faced dramatically reduced competition for resources. They radiated out, evolving rapidly to fill the countless vacant niches. This period of explosive evolution following the end Permian extinction directly paved the way for the rise of the dinosaurs, who would go on to dominate the planet for the next 180 million years. In this sense, the volcanic fury that nearly ended life on Earth also set the stage for one of its most spectacular and iconic chapters. It's a humbling reminder that evolution is not always a slow, gradual process. Sometimes it is accelerated by catastrophic upheaval, forcing life to adapt, innovate, and diversify at a breakneck pace. The volcano, therefore, is not merely a destroyer of worlds but also an unlikely midwife to new forms of life, constantly shaking the evolutionary tree and ensuring that the story of life on Earth is one of constant dynamic change. While we often focus on the dramatic, sun-blocking power of sulfur dioxide, the true story of volcanoes and our atmosphere is one of two powerful and opposing forces locked in an eternal dance. On one hand, you have the short-term, brilliant flashes of cooling from sulfur aerosols. On the other, a slow, steady, and deeply fundamental process of warming driven by a different gas entirely, carbon dioxide. This is the incredible duality of volcanoes. They are both the planet's emergency cooling system and one of its most vital long-term heating systems, having played an indispensable role in crafting the very air we breathe over billions of years. This process, known as volcanic outgassing, is the primary way our planet replenishes its atmosphere with gases that were once locked deep within the molten rock of the mantle. Throughout Earth's history, countless eruptions have steadily vented enormous quantities of water vapor, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and other gases. In fact, the vast majority of the gases in our atmosphere today, including the water that eventually condensed to form our oceans, originally came from this relentless volcanic activity early in the planet's life. This wasn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing geological process that continues to this day, subtly adding to and regulating the composition of our air. The long-term warming effect of this CO2 release is just as critical as the short-term cooling. While a single large eruption might cause a volcanic winter for a few years, the cumulative effect of millions of years of smaller, continuous eruptions is a steady, background trickle of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This acts as a natural counterbalance to processes that remove CO2, like the weathering of rocks and the burial of organic material at sea. Most importantly, this volcanic outgassing is one of the key mechanisms that has historically pulled Earth out of its frozen slumbers. During periods of intense, prolonged glaciation known as snowball Earth events, it is believed that volcanoes continued to erupt from beneath the ice, slowly building up greenhouse gases in the atmosphere over millions of years until a tipping point was reached. The greenhouse effect would become so powerful that it would overwhelm the ice albedo effect, where white ice reflects sunlight, and trigger a rapid and dramatic thaw, bringing the planet out of the deep freeze and back into a warmer state conducive to life. A fascinating and more recent example of this warming power involves the demise of the dinosaurs. While the Chicxulub asteroid impact gets most of the credit for their extinction, it may have been the final blow to an ecosystem already under severe stress from climate change. In what is now India, a series of monumental volcanic eruptions known as the Deccan Traps were underway. For hundreds of thousands of years, these fissures spewed enough lava to cover an area the size of France in layers of basalt rock miles thick. Along with that lava came staggering amounts of carbon dioxide and other gases. Scientists now believe this prolonged period of volcanism may have already been significantly warming the planet and acidifying the oceans, making ecosystems more fragile and vulnerable. When the asteroid struck, it hit a world that was already sick, potentially amplifying the severity of the mass extinction that followed. This deep time perspective is absolutely crucial for understanding our current climate predicament. The same carbon dioxide that volcanoes have slowly released over eons to maintain Earth's habitability is now being released by human activity at a pace that is orders of magnitude faster. We are essentially conducting a massive, uncontrolled experiment in volcanic outgassing, but without the accompanying sun blocking sulfur dioxide to temper the effect. Recognizing that volcanoes have both cooled and warmed the planet throughout history allows us to see modern climate change not as an isolated event, but as a dramatic acceleration of one part of an ancient and powerful natural cycle, underscoring the profound responsibility we have in managing our own planetary impact. Long before the advent of ice cores and satellite monitoring, humanity had another way of processing the sheer terror and wonder of these events: through story. Woven into the myths and legends of cultures across the globe are powerful echoes of volcanic resets, narratives that served as both a warning and a way to make sense of a world that could suddenly and violently turn against them. These are not mere fairy tales, they are a profound form of oral history, a collective memory of catastrophe preserved across generations. When a community experiences a years-long winter, the failure of the sun, and the fall of choking ash from the sky, the event is so world-shattering that it demands an explanation on a mythological scale. The gods must be angry, the giants are stirring, or the world itself is coming to an end. Consider the chilling Norse prophecy of Fimbulwinter. This was not just a bad season, it was a 3-year-long period of relentless snow and freezing winds that was foretold to precede Ragnarök, the apocalyptic battle that would lead to the death of the gods and the submersion of the entire world in water. For a people living in the already challenging climate of Scandinavia, the idea of a winter that never ends is the ultimate embodiment of doom. Historians and climatologists now see a likely kernel of truth in this myth. It closely mirrors the real-world effects of a major volcanic eruption, exactly like the one that caused the year 536, an event that would have been within the living memory of the Norse people's ancestors. The myth of Fimbulwinter can be read as a cultural memory of a volcanic reset, a story that packaged the trauma of a real climate disaster into a powerful cosmological narrative. Perhaps the most famous legend potentially born from a volcano is the story of Atlantis, first described by the Greek philosopher Plato. He wrote of a sophisticated, powerful island civilization that, in a single terrible day and night, was swallowed by the sea and vanished forever. For centuries, Atlantis was considered a philosophical allegory, but the discovery of the Minoan settlement on Santorini, buried under dozens of meters of volcanic rock and ash, gave the story a startling new plausibility. The eruption of Thera was a cataclysm of almost unimaginable proportions. The central part of the island collapsed into the emptied magma chamber, instantly creating a massive caldera that was flooded by the sea. This sudden subsidence, followed by tsunami waves hundreds of feet high racing across the Mediterranean, perfectly matches the description of a land being swallowed by the sea. The sophisticated Minoan civilization on Crete, a major naval power, was crippled by this event and soon faded from history. It is not difficult to imagine how the story of this advanced island culture's sudden and violent demise could have been passed down for generations, eventually reaching Plato 1,000 years later and inspiring his tale of a lost utopia. Across the world, these patterns repeat. Indigenous cultures living in the shadow of volcanoes often personify them as temperamental deities. The Hawaiian goddess Pele is a being of fiery passion and destructive creativity, whose movements were said to form the island's new volcanic landscapes. To anger her was to invite rivers of lava to consume your village. In Java, the volcano Mount Bromo is considered a sacred site, and its annual ceremony reflects a deep-seated cultural respect for its power. These stories are more than just primitive science. They are a sophisticated framework for understanding and coping with forces far beyond human control. They provided rules for living in a geologically active world and offered rituals to appease the powerful forces believed to be behind the chaos. By studying these myths, we gain an invaluable window into how our ancestors not only survived these planetary resets, but processed the profound psychological trauma they inflicted, transforming raw fear into a story that could be told around a fire, ensuring that the memory of the danger and the lessons of survival would never be forgotten. Given the sheer scale of past events, it's only natural to wonder, could it happen again in our lifetime? The short answer is yes, but the likelihood is thankfully quite small. Current geological estimates suggest the probability of a supereruption occurring within the next 100 years sits at roughly 1%. To put that in perspective, you're statistically far more likely to witness a large asteroid impact. But unlike an asteroid which can arrive with almost no warning, a supervolcano gives us clues. Systems like Yellowstone, Campi Flegrei, and Topo are under constant surveillance, and while they are restless, they are not currently on the brink of catastrophe. These are not ticking time bombs, but slow, geological giants that operate on timescales of hundreds of thousands of years. However, that 1% chance carries consequences so vast that we simply cannot afford to ignore it. An eruption on the scale of Yellowstone's last major event would be a civilization-altering catastrophe. The immediate effects would be bad enough regional annihilation under meters of hot ash. But the real global crisis would be the volcanic winter that follows. Climate models project such an event would plunge global average temperatures by several degrees Celsius for a decade or more. Growing seasons across the world's breadbaskets would fail repeatedly. Global food distribution networks would shatter under the strain, potentially leading to widespread famine. Energy grids would be tested by increased demand for heating and cooling in a radically altered climate. The economic and social upheaval would be unprecedented in modern history. This presents a startling and deeply uncomfortable paradox. The same volcanic winter that would cause such immense human suffering would also, temporarily, counteract the effects of human-caused global warming. The immense veil of sulfate aerosols would reflect sunlight, masking the warming from our centuries of greenhouse gas emissions. But this is not a solution, it's a dystopian trade-off. It would be like trying to cure a fever by giving the patient a dangerous and unpredictable poison. The side effects, including potential disruptions to global rainfall patterns that could cause devastating droughts, would be utterly catastrophic and beyond our control. This stark contrast forces us to confront a critical truth. We must address human-driven climate change through deliberate, sustainable action, not by pinning hopes on a geological catastrophe. This reality makes proactive planning not just prudent, but essential. Preparedness moves us from a mindset of fear to one of resilience. It means continuing to fund and enhance the global networks that monitor these volcanic systems, giving us the earliest possible warning. It also means fostering unprecedented levels of international cooperation to develop contingency plans for food security, energy management, and humanitarian aid on a global scale. Understanding this risk is not about fostering doom, but about empowering ourselves with knowledge. By respecting the raw power of our planet and planning for its most extreme possibilities, we build a society that is more robust, adaptable, and ultimately wiser. While volcanoes represent an internal threat born from Earth's own fiery heart, our planet also faces the possibility of a climate reset arriving from the cold depths of space. Asteroid impacts share the capacity to plunge the world into a prolonged winter, but the mechanics of their destruction unfold in a uniquely catastrophic instant. Imagine not the gradual, rumbling buildup to a supervolcanic eruption, but a sudden, blinding flash in the sky as a mountain-sized rock, traveling dozens of times faster than a bullet, slams into the crust. The energy released in that single moment is orders of magnitude greater than the combined yield of every nuclear weapon ever built, vaporizing rock, water, and life at the point of contact and triggering a chain of global devastation. The immediate local effects are apocalyptic, but the global climate reset begins with a colossal volume of material instantly ejected into the upper atmosphere. The impact itself pulverizes the asteroid and a vast quantity of the Earth's crust into a fine, incandescent dust, while the unimaginable heat generated by the collision cooks the surrounding rock, releasing enormous plumes of sulfur dioxide and other gases. This creates a rapidly expanding cloud of debris and aerosols that is violently shot high into the stratosphere, similar to a volcanic plume but in a fraction of the time. Almost immediately, this material begins to spread across the globe, but an impact adds several terrifying layers of destruction that a volcano typically does not. The initial fireball and the raining back of superheated ejecta can spark continent-wide wildfires, pumping even more soot and ash into the already choked sky. Furthermore, if the asteroid strikes an ocean, it can generate mega-tsunamis miles high that scour coastlines thousands of miles away, adding massive flooding to the list of immediate horrors. The most famous example of this is, of course, the Chicxulub impactor that struck off the coast of what is now Mexico 66 million years ago. That event left a crater over 90 miles wide and is famously linked to the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. For decades, the precise kill mechanism was debated, but it's now widely accepted that the resulting climate change was the primary culprit. The models show that the injection of dust and sulfates would have created a profound and prolonged impact winter, perhaps even more severe and abrupt than the aftermath of the largest supervolcano. Sunlight was drastically reduced for potentially years, halting photosynthesis and collapsing food webs from the bottom up. This was not a gradual decline but a sudden, brutal shock to the entire planetary system. The key difference between the two threats often lies in their duration and predictability. A supervolcanic eruption, while catastrophic, is part of an ongoing geological process. We can monitor the swelling of calderas and the rising magma, offering at least a theoretical window of warning. An asteroid impact, by contrast, can provide almost no warning unless we actively search for the threat. Furthermore, while a single volcano can erupt for weeks or months, an asteroid delivers its entire climatic payload in a matter of minutes. However, volcanoes can have a persistence that impacts lack. A major volcanic province, like the Deccan Traps that were active around the same time as the Chicxulub impact, can continue erupting for hundreds of thousands of years, providing a sustained, if less intense, pressure on the climate system. This prolonged assault can weaken ecosystems, making them more vulnerable to a final, knockout blow from an impact or another disaster. Studying both events side by side provides scientists with a more complete understanding of the different pathways to planetary catastrophe. It allows them to refine climate models to see how the atmosphere and oceans respond to both a sudden, single punch and a longer, drawn-out siege. This comparative research is absolutely vital for planetary defense, helping us assess the real risks from both terrestrial and extraterrestrial sources. It underscores a humbling and unifying truth. Whether the catalyst comes from deep below our feet or from the far reaches of our solar system, the Earth's climate system is a delicate and interconnected web, vulnerable to being thrown into disarray by sufficiently powerful forces. This knowledge doesn't just satisfy scientific curiosity. It highlights the critical importance of initiatives like NAS, a Planetary Defense Coordination Office, which actively tracks near-Earth objects, because understanding these ancient resets is our best hope for preparing for, or even preventing, the next one. Perhaps the most profound lesson written in the ash layers of history is not one of destruction, but of breathtaking resilience. Our planet, and the life upon it, possesses an almost miraculous capacity for recovery, a deep-rooted adaptability forged in the crucible of catastrophe. These volcanic resets, while utterly devastating in the short term, are not final endings. They are, in the grandest geological sense, harsh but effective pruning mechanisms. Life does not merely persist, it often returns with a renewed vigor and diversity, seizing the opportunity to fill newly vacated niches and experiment with novel forms. This resilience isn't a lucky accident but a fundamental property of biological systems, honed over billions of years of responding to environmental shocks. Ecosystems don't simply bounce back to their previous state, they reassemble themselves into something new, often stronger and more complex than before. Human civilizations, for all our technological sophistication, are also testament to this spirit of adaptation. Our history is punctuated by volcanic disasters that forced our ancestors to make impossible choices, and their responses reveal the core of human ingenuity. When the skies darkened after an eruption and crops failed for years on end, societies didn't just passively accept their fate. They innovated, developing new food storage techniques or switching to more resilient crops. They migrated, undertaking perilous journeys to find new lands with more stable climates, a process that spread people, ideas, and cultures across the globe in waves of upheaval and renewal. And crucially, they cooperated, facing a common threat that no individual could overcome. Communities likely forged new alliances, shared dwindling resources, and developed social structures centered on mutual aid. These historical episodes of survival are a powerful reminder that our greatest asset in a crisis is not just technology, but our ability to work together and adapt our collective behavior. This long view of history offers a crucial and hopeful perspective for confronting our own modern environmental challenges, particularly human-induced climate change. While the scale and cause are different, the core principles of resilience and adaptation remain the same. Studying past volcanic resets teaches us that disruption, however severe, does not have to be a permanent defeat. It can be a catalyst for transformation, forcing innovation and societal evolution that might not have occurred otherwise. The key to long-term survival, as both nature and history show us, is not rigidity but flexibility, the capacity to learn, to change course, and to build systems that can withstand and recover from shock. This knowledge empowers a shift from a mindset of paralyzing pessimism to one of proactive preparation. Instead of fearing change, we can learn to anticipate it and build buffers against it. We can look to nature's playbook for inspiration, designing agricultural systems that are more diverse and drought-resistant, much like the pioneer species that colonize barren lava flows. We can invest in decentralized food and energy networks that are less vulnerable to a single point of failure, mirroring the way ecosystems distribute functions across many different species. By understanding the mechanisms of planetary recovery, we can actively foster resilience in our own communities, making them more robust, more flexible, and better equipped to handle whatever disruptions the future may hold, whether they rise from the Earth itself or from our own actions. This perspective doesn't promise an easy path, but it does provide a roadmap grounded in the proven endurance of life on Earth, encouraging us to meet uncertainty not with dread, but with determined ingenuity. The power to predict a volcanic catastrophe is no longer a fantasy of science fiction, but with this emerging capability comes a host of profound ethical dilemmas that we are only just beginning to confront. Imagine the immense responsibility resting on the shoulders of a scientist who sees the unmistakable signs of a potential supereruption at a place like Yellowstone. The data might suggest an increasing probability, but absolute certainty remains elusive. Who then has the authority to make the call to evacuate millions of people across multiple states? A decision that would trigger unprecedented economic chaos and social disruption, potentially for a threat that may not materialize for decades. This is not merely a scientific calculation. It is a crushing ethical burden that intertwines with issues of social justice, as those with fewer resources would inevitably face greater hardship in any mass displacement. This leads directly to the difficult question of resource allocation. Monitoring these volcanic systems is incredibly expensive, requiring cutting-edge technology and a global network of highly skilled experts. In a world grappling with poverty, disease, and immediate climate disasters, how do we justify spending billions of dollars on monitoring a catastrophic event that has only a 1% chance of occurring in the next century? It becomes a complex calculation of risk management versus immediate humanitarian needs, a balancing act that demands transparent public discourse and international cooperation. The choice to invest in planetary defense is a statement of values, prioritizing long-term resilience and intergenerational responsibility against pressing present-day crises. Perhaps the most contentious ethical frontier is the idea of geoengineering, of deliberately mimicking a volcanic eruption to cool the planet. While the science is inspired by nature, the act itself would be a colossal human intervention with unpredictable and uneven consequences. The nations that would most benefit from a sun-shielding aerosol layer might be half a world away from the countries that would suffer its side effects, such as prolonged drought or disruptions to monsoon patterns. This raises critical issues of global consent and equity. Who gets a seat at the table to decide whether we should deploy such a technology? Should a single nation or a corporation have the power to unilaterally alter the planet's atmosphere for everyone? The potential for conflict is staggering, echoing broader debates about humanity's right to play a direct role in managing planetary systems we do not fully understand. These modern quandaries are not entirely new. We can find guidance by looking back at how past societies responded to volcanic resets. These events often forced communities to make difficult choices about migration, resource sharing, and prioritizing the collective good. The lessons are clear. Survival depended on cooperation, inclusive decision-making, and a deep respect for the power of nature. This historical context underscores the necessity of approaching our new technological powers with profound humility and compassion, ensuring that our efforts to control nature are guided by a framework of global ethics and a commitment to justice for the most vulnerable among us. In the complex dance of our modern climate system, volcanoes continue to play their ancient role, occasionally offering us a fleeting glimpse of what a planetary cool-down might look like. A powerful example of this occurred in June 1991, when Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines roared back to life after centuries of silence. Its eruption was a spectacular and tragic event, but for climate scientists, it became one of the most significant natural experiments of the 20th century. The eruption ejected an estimated 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide high into the stratosphere, where it swiftly transformed into a globe-girdling haze of sulfate aerosols. This man-made sunshade was so effective that over the following 2 years, it reflected enough incoming solar radiation to lower the average global temperature by approximately half a degree Celsius. For a brief period, the relentless upward climb of the thermometer on our planet actually paused and even slightly reversed. This temporary reprieve from warming provided an invaluable opportunity to test and refine the computer models that scientists used to predict our climate future. Researchers could input the exact volume of gases Pinatubo released, and then check the model's temperature projections against the real-world cooling that followed. The results were a resounding validation of the fundamental physics behind climate science. The models performed with remarkable accuracy, giving us greater confidence in their projections for human-caused warming. Furthermore, this natural experiment revealed intricate feedback loops within the climate system. For instance, the cooling effect altered global precipitation patterns, and the subsequent recovery period showed how the oceans, which had absorbed vast amounts of heat, began to release it back into the atmosphere, contributing to a return to warmer conditions. However, this episode also delivers a crucial and sobering lesson. The dramatic cooling from Pinatubo, while significant, was entirely transient. Within about 2 years, the stratospheric aerosols had dissipated and their masking effect vanished. This brief intervention stands in stark contrast to the carbon dioxide we continue to pump into the atmosphere from burning fossil fuels and deforestation. Unlike volcanic sulfates, which rain out of the sky relatively quickly, carbon dioxide is a persistent gas that can remain aloft, trapping heat for centuries. The cooling from even the largest eruptions is a temporary dip in an otherwise steadily rising temperature curve, a small bump on a steep and dangerous uphill road. This stark difference underscores a critical point. we cannot rely on volcanic activity or any attempt to mimic it through geoengineering to solve the climate crisis we have created. While the idea of artificially replicating a Pinatubo-like effect is sometimes discussed as a last-ditch technological fix, it would come with the same set of severe risks and limitations: unpredictable shifts in rainfall, potential damage to the ozone layer, and the necessity of continuous, costly reapplication for centuries. It would be treating a symptom while ignoring the root cause of the disease. The story of volcanoes and climate change ultimately reinforces the profound importance of human agency and responsibility. These natural events show us that the planet possesses powerful mechanisms for temperature regulation, but they operate on their own terms and timelines, often with devastating side effects. Our task is not to try and hijack these systems for our own purposes, but to learn from them, respect their power, and most importantly, take decisive action to reduce our own emissions and steward the delicate balance of our atmosphere with the care and urgency it demands. So what does this grand tapestry of fire, ice, and resilience ultimately reveal? The story of volcanic climate resets is a powerful lesson in planetary dynamics, showing us that Earth operates not as a static stage for life, but as a deeply interconnected and self-regulating system. These cataclysmic events are the planet's most dramatic form of recalibration, a violent but effective mechanism for releasing built-up pressure, both geological and climatic. They demonstrate a fundamental truth about our world, that creation and destruction are not opposites but two sides of the same coin, locked in an endless, necessary dance. The fertile soils that feed civilizations are born from the ashes of unimaginable devastation. The cooling that prevents a runaway greenhouse effect comes from the same source that can plunge us into a decade of winter. This is not a comfortable balance, but it is a balance nonetheless, forged over billions of years and essential for the long-term habitability of our world. This perspective fosters a profound sense of humility and awe. It reminds us that human history, for all its grandeur, is a very recent and fragile chapter in a much older, more powerful story written by forces far beyond our control. Our civilizations have risen and fallen to the rhythm of volcanic pulses, our migrations and innovations often sparked by the need to adapt to a climate suddenly shifted by a distant eruption. Recognizing this interconnectedness, how a shift in the geological realm ripples through the atmosphere, then through ecosystems, and finally through human societies, is crucial. It moves us away from seeing ourselves as separate from nature and towards an understanding that we are deeply embedded within its complex and often unforgiving web. In our modern era, grappling with human-induced climate change, this ancient wisdom becomes incredibly practical. It informs our strategies for adaptation and risk management. By studying how life and previous societies weathered these volcanic winters, we can design more resilient agricultural systems, create more robust emergency response plans, and foster the kind of international cooperation that would be essential in a global crisis. It also offers a sobering cautionary tale for technological fixes like geoengineering. The volcanic model shows us that while manipulating sunlight can cool the planet, it does so with a host of dangerous and unpredictable side effects, disrupting rainfall patterns and threatening food and water security for millions. Ultimately, synthesizing this concept allows us to hold two seemingly contradictory ideas in mind at once. We can acknowledge the terrifying destructive power of volcanoes while also appreciating their paradoxical role as agents of renewal and balance. We can feel a sense of vulnerability in the face of such immense natural forces, while also drawing immense inspiration from the proven resilience of life and human ingenuity. This holistic view, weaving together the scientific evidence, the historical narratives, and the ethical questions, grants us a deeper, more nuanced appreciation for our planet's history. It teaches us that the ground beneath our feet is not as solid as it seems, that the climate we depend on is a delicate equilibrium, and that our future will depend on our ability to learn from the past, embrace uncertainty, and navigate change with both wisdom and humility. From the ash-choked skies of ancient supervolcanoes to the silent chemical whispers in polar ice, the journey we've taken together reveals a story far more complex and awe-inspiring than simple destruction. It is a narrative of profound paradox, where the same immense power that can bring a planet to its knees also holds the key to its renewal. These fiery giants have acted as Earth's great recalibrators, their eruptions serving as violent but necessary resets that have cooled overheating climates, enriched barren soils, and even cleared the evolutionary stage for new acts of life to begin. This is not a tale of random chaos, but one of a dynamic and self-regulating system, a planet with its own deep rhythms and powerful balancing mechanisms that operate on a scale both humbling and magnificent. The lessons etched into this geological record are not just about the past, they are urgently relevant for our present and our future, as we now navigate an era of rapid, human-driven climate change. The story of volcanic resets offers us a crucial perspective. It teaches us about resilience, the incredible capacity of both natural systems and human societies to adapt, innovate, and ultimately persevere through profound disruption. It underscores the critical importance of balance, showing us that our atmosphere is a delicate and interconnected web, easily thrown into disarray by powerful forces, whether they rise from the Earth's mantle or from our own industries. Most importantly, it reminds us of humility. Our civilization, for all its technological marvels, remains deeply vulnerable to the fundamental forces of nature, and our best path forward is one of respect, cooperation, and thoughtful stewardship. This understanding can and should inspire action. On a personal level, it might mean making more sustainable choices, reducing our carbon footprint, or simply fostering a deeper appreciation for the complex planet we call home. Collectively, it demands that we support scientific research, advocate for thoughtful policies that protect our environment, and invest in building resilient communities that can withstand the disruptions that lie ahead, be they from a changing climate or from the Earth's own inevitable restlessness. The knowledge that our world has faced and recovered from catastrophic resets is not an excuse for inaction. It is a powerful call to participate wisely in the planet's ongoing story, to ensure that the next chapter is one of harmony rather than collapse. Thank you for joining me on this extraordinary journey deep into Earth's fiery heart and across the broad sweep of time. If this exploration of how volcanoes rebalanced our planet has given you a new perspective, please feel free to share your own thoughts and reflections in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into historical mysteries, liking this video and subscribing to the channel truly helps others discover this content. Together, let's keep exploring the profound and fascinating forces that have shaped and continue to shape our incredible